Let me continue on that theme about we not being church-driven. I hope I've clarified that. We are obviously pro-local church. That's the vehicle through which the Lord wants to reach the world. People who biblically disciple within the context of the local church, whether that's a building or a home church, is not a critical distinction. Regarding the church, Bill Hull, who is a prominent with an organization that we respect a ton, website is discipleship.org. We go to their conferences and believe in what they're about and who they are. He said this, and I like this articulation, so I'm going to read it verbatim if I could. Jesus' command was to make disciples, not to start churches. But if you make disciples, churches are the result. Hopefully I hit that theme. They are the result because they're needed. The church is for discipleship, and disciples are the church's gift to the world. Disciples are the delivery system for spreading God's good news to the world. I like that articulation. I thought that was very interesting. The church takes them in, loves them, equips them, sends them back into the world to be salt and light. The church, which is people, right? The church is the body of Christ, is evaluated by its success in preparing and sending mature, Christ-like people into the world. The project will be to understand the dynamic of how leadership relates to this and how a plan can be implemented. We've talked about our plan. It's not the plan, it's a plan. And we talk about it driven by leadership. Leadership is what drives things, both positively and negatively. We talk about focusing on the few. We'll get into that more when we get into master plan principles, that Jesus focused on the few to impact the many. He realized that the flock is fickle and it will follow wherever the magnet pulls strongest. And so when Jesus was doing miracles, they followed him. But when he talked about dying, they didn't follow him because they were fickle. And you're only going to be strong as your leadership. And our comment is everybody's a leader. I've talked about that before. The question is not if you're a leader. It's, The question is not if you're a leader, but what kind of leader you are. Because everybody is in a position of leadership. Certainly if they ever marry, they're in a position of leadership as the husband, or the wife and husband as parents, or the older sibling over the younger sibling. And it's true in the vocational. I talked about that at McDonald's. If you flip burgers for a week or a day and they send somebody in the back, you're the one that's responsible at some level to disciple the new person in how to flip burgers and what to do and what not to do. And so the question isn't about if, it's what kind. And so I love this articulation. Biblical reproduction and multiplication of disciples is the target, The result is that churches will be built up, edified, strengthened, empowered, the local body to reach the world. And this will develop more and more bodies of believers called the local church. The third thing I want to address is that we are not, as a discipleship community, small group driven. Listen to this. Where you find small groups, you may not find discipleship. However, where you have biblical discipleship, there will be small groups of disciples making disciples. Does that make sense? So we have looked in the Western church as small groups being almost like nirvana. It's like the goal is to move people from attending on Sundays or Saturday nights or whatever to them being in a small group where they can build relationships and care and share. All of which is true. But it's not an end-all be-all, because within that small group, the question is what happens. Sometimes they just talk a lot, which is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's a counseling forum. Sometimes they have a devotional. Sometimes they pray a little bit, usually not a lot. Sometimes they go through an outside book. There's all kinds of small group ideas and options. It's relational as an intent. That's a good thing. But there may not be a plan to mature the believer in an intentional and strategic way. There certainly may not be reproduction with an end point of multiplication. And so where you have discipleship, you're going to have someone pouring into someone, and that in a sense is a small group, it's two. it might be 3, it may be 5, 7, 12, or it may be more. But where you have discipleship biblically, practicing the what, why, and how, there will be small groups. But where as a local church you have small groups, there may not be any biblical discipleship. The ball may be moving forward. That's true. So it falls under the banner generally of discipleship. There may actually be addition. People are coming to the faith through the small group. My experience is generally small groups tend to be inclusive. They tend to be exclusive, meaning they meet together and they're not looking to add. They're looking to grow together. They're looking to become Dead Seas for a window of time, and it actually is problematic when somebody wants to grow because they're afraid then it's going to change the dynamic of the intimacy that's developing. And so the end point is actually to become a Dead Sea by not evangelizing nor discipling, though you are highly relational and becoming closer. None of that necessarily translates into others in the world that suppose that you're coming together. So in our discipleship, we come together to go out, and in small groups, sometimes they come together to be together. They're not thinking about going out. They may make a decision to take their group and do a service project. That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. We're not implying this is bad or wrong. It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of what did Jesus do with the 12, and are there applicable principles that we can approximate? Is there an intent there? Is there a target there? Much higher, deeper, wider, farther than just meeting together for the sake of community, with the end point being we enjoy each other and feel family and loved. That's a great place to go. It's not a place to stay. That's all we're attempting to say. In a discipleship community, biblically, they will have that similar kind of intimacy and camaraderie. But it's organic, it's fluid, it's changing, it's adding and just like the nuclear family. Could you imagine a nuclear family having their first child and say, no more kids, we don't want to hang out with other people, we want to love each other and love our son or daughter, and he to love us, and we stay just isolated and encouraged. And occasionally we'll go out as a group on Sunday to meet other people. You'd look at that and say, that's kind of weird, man. It was not his intent for people to come together in intimacy without turning that intimacy and expression of reaching the world in evangelism and discipleship. We are not small group driven. Rather, we drive small groups. Fourth one, we are not Bible study driven. Again, I share it that way to just provoke people to get them to sit up in their seat a little bit. Because we're not saying that we don't like Bible studies. It's just we're not Bible study driven, though we learn how to use a study Bible. What I've found is when people are Bible study driven, it's about them. It's about their growth. It's not sustainable because at some point the Bible study leader is going to leave or he's going to die. And now the people in the circle that are growing in knowledge, who've never been taught to reproduce and multiply, unless they have a lot of courage and a lot of punch, they're not going to lead another Bible study. They're just going to attend another Bible study. They're going to find some other place that can give them that growth. And they're going to hunt and fish until they find the best personal growth mechanism, which again has nothing to do with others. It doesn't introduce them into giving their life away. It doesn't even move them forward on practical expression of obedience. It does move them forward on greater and greater knowledge. I don't think the problem in America is there's a lack of biblical knowledge. There's a lack of biblical reading. There's a lack of prayer. There's a lack of Bible memory. There's a lack of people feeling comfortable sharing their testimony. There's a lack of accountability, particularly within the leadership. There's a lack of people who feel comfortable sharing their faith and actually leading people into Jesus. But in terms of knowing stories and understanding fragments of doctrine, they can get that dose once a week at a few churches in their city, probably. Maybe even more than a few. But that may never get them outside the walls. That may never move them down the road of even thinking about reproducing themselves in an intentional, strategic way with somebody. If you're going to meet with somebody, take them somewhere. Don't just meet to meet. Don't meet to greet. Don't meet to fellowship. That's all good. Come together to go out to do the works of the kingdom of the Great Commission lifestyle. That's what we're talking about. The education, the practice, the implementation, the reproduction, the multiplication of it. We are not one-on-one driven. There's this fallacy and misnomer, don't know when it started, it's been as long as I've been alive, that when you do whatever discipleship is, you meet with people one-on-one. I don't know many people who have the time to meet one-on-one. Certainly not if they're in full-time ministry and have a job that has complete flexibility. When you get married, and nowadays when both work, let alone one work, and maybe a job that's not 8 to 5, and you have a child, and you attempt to be involved in any kinds of outside the home activities, there's not a lot of margin. There's not a lot of time. Now you might be able to finagle to meet with somebody, and maybe two, but in an intentional, strategic way to make yourself available to continuously reproduce and multiply, that's super hard. Think of the nuclear family when you think of this issue and see how twisted we've got it. Oftentimes people don't disciple because they don't have time to meet with a bunch of people one-on-one. Jesus was not a one-on-one guy. He was a 3 and 12 guy. He met with 3 and he met with 12. Mostly he met with the 12, but occasionally took the 3. And then he had 70 others that he eventually sent out 2 by 2 that somehow or another were distinct from the 12. And the 12 were distinct from the 3 because we have gospel evidence that the 3 got invited into special situations. I've talked about that previously. Transfiguration, the girl who needed to be healed, right, that he invited Peter, James, and John in. Jesus discipled in groups. Can you imagine if you had 5 children, that every single children you had one-on-one time with every day, even though you were teaching them similar things, you went to one and then the other? How would that work if you work in a regular job? How would you have time to do practical things that happen in a family and make sure you get quantity and quality time with each child individually? You don't. You parent in groups. Sometimes when necessary, for good and bad reasons, it might be a matter of discipline or it might be a matter of blessing, you are alone. You might have a date night with your daughter or go to a ball game with one of your 3 sons. But for the most part, when you go to the park, everybody goes. When you go to a ball game, everybody goes. When you go to church, everybody goes. When you go on vacation, everybody goes. When you eat a meal, everybody's there. And parenting occurs within that context of real life. The best discipleship, Dr. Coleman says, happens in the leisure moments. The impact of my 6-year-old is not when I sit down and try to teach her a lesson. The impact of my 6-year-old and what she'll remember is when I play Barbie dolls with her, when I play characters with her, when I sing songs with her, when I do regular life with her because I'm with her. Walk with God, be with people. Some people call it togetherness, withness. I'm with somebody. Your ability to impact somebody is linked with you being with them. It's hard to impact them when you're not with them. You can, it's just harder. Do you parent from a distance? You parent when they're in the same home. Nowadays, with the way culture is, people, for a variety of reasons, of family structure and brokenness, etc., they have to parent from a distance because they don't have their children in the home full time. That's harder. Everybody understand that wouldn't have been the original design and intent in a marriage or in a family. That they were meant to learn together. Jesus met with Nicodemus alone to protect him and met with the woman at the well at home who was a prostitute to protect her. There's not a biblical example of him meeting with the disciples one-on-one. He had conversations with one-on-one, but the other 12 or 3 were around. When Peter said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God," when Jesus rebuked him, everybody learned because everybody was there. When I talk to my daughter and I correct her or I bless her, my sons hear what they should and shouldn't do. When I correct my son, the daughter hears. When I correct one son, the other son hears. It's an advantage to have all the family together. When I teach this morning, and there's 15 guys in the room, I could never meet with those 15 guys, let alone 8, let alone 5 one-on-one. There wouldn't be time. I would fracture other priorities. But when I have them together, they all learn together. And when one asks a question, everybody learns together. Discipleship is meant to be done together. It's meant to be together with. The family is raised in community. There are exceptions for one-on-ones, but they're rare instead of the norm. And discipleship is not one-on-one any more than Jesus' disciples were one-on-ones. They were all 3s and mostly 12s. And 70s were invited in occasionally, just like your neighbors are invited in occasionally. But wherever he went, his little flock went with him. So when he went to the neighbors, a neighboring city, when he went somewhere, the disciples were with him, because you raise your family together and you do the works of the kingdom together. So find as many ways as you can to have an expression of life while being together. If you go to Home Depot, ask if anybody wants to go with you. When I go to the airport, I did it this morning, I said, does somebody want to drive me and pick me up so we can get some time together? If a few of you want to come, that's great. If one of you wants to come, that's great. The more the merrier. I'm with my disciples together as I run errands and do life. When they run errands, I'd love them to contact me. Hey, if you're free this afternoon, we're heading out to the zoo or the park or whatever. Do you want to bring Riley? It's our way to be together while we do life. It's not compartmentalized, it's integrated. It's the integration of life and discipling biblically. He ate with them, he walked with them, he talked with them, he bathed with them. He did everything with them. He evangelized with them. He discipled with them. They saw him do it in community. They then reproduced and multiplied discipleship in community. Look at the letters of Paul's and how many times people were traveling with him. His disciples and peers were with him as he did the business of the kingdom. He didn't meet with Barnabas and Timothy and Silas in one-on-ones. They were all together in ministry together, doing the works of the kingdom together, because the scriptures say that the world will know that we are his disciples by our love for one another, which they can't see when we're not together. Togetherness. That's biblical discipleship.